Okay. Let's see if I can hang this. Oh dear. Alright, so in this segment I will be speaking about the so-called Pygmalion effect, or it's also sometimes called the Rosenthal effect, which is basically the name for the fact that our expectations of someone tends to shape the way that these people, or animals as well, perform. It's called Pygmalion after an old Egyptian legend about, well, if you want to know, it's about this person who has become disillusioned with women, and so he starts to create figures of women instead. And he falls in love with one of them, and he begs for it to be... he begs for it to come alive, and his wish is granted. So basically it's called the Pygmalion effect because it has something to do with self-fulfilling prophecies. Honestly, I don't quite see the logic there from the myth to that, but whatever the case is what you usually call it. It's of course, I mean, to some extent it's a little bit intuitive. I think a lot of us has the feeling that there's a connection between how others expect us to behave and how we actually end up behaving, and so this is kind of more like a... So is this just like... is it just something that we think, or is it actually the case? Clearly I'm getting tired. Am I even making any sense here? I hope so. So anyway, a guy called Rosenthal, Robert Rosenthal, decided to look at this phenomena experimentally in the 60s. And the first thing that he did was that he looked at how an experimenter's expectance of how rats would behave actually affects these rats. And I personally think this is a bit interesting because, I mean, I think in general the relationship between human and animal is quite interesting. So what Rosenthal did was that he picked out some of his students, psychology students, and he told them, I need you to perform these experiments with these rats. They have to go through a labyrinth, and they have to learn certain things, and so on forward. So what he also did was that he told these students that they had made some rats that were smarter and some rats that were slower, and this was due to some inbreeding. It had turned out this way. Some were like smart rats and some were like slow rats. So one of the groups of students, student experimenters, were told, well, here you go, these are the smart rats, have fun. And the other group got the opposite message, like, here are the slow rats, have fun. So what happened was that once they were done with this experiment, there was actually a significant difference between the performance of the so-called smart rats to that of the slow rats. I mean, one thing was that the smart rats performed these tasks that they had to do better, but they also performed them 30% faster than the so-called slow rats. Okay, so this is interesting, and I think it's probably a bit much to go into detail about why this might be so. One thing to consider is that when asked, these students who had the smart rats generally saw the rats as smarter and cuter than the guys who had the slow rats, and they also saw themselves as more focused and more appreciative of the animals. Anyway. So then, of course, the question to Rosenthal was after this, does this apply to humans as well? Because in psychology, that's often the end goal and what you're interested in. And, well, what he did was that he looked at the American school system. And what he saw, first of all, was that teachers intended to have different expectations of white middle class Caucasian kids than they did to perhaps kids of a lower class, black kids, Mexican kids, so on forward. And of course, this was quite worrying for a for everyone, to be fair, but it was also worrying for a psychologist who was studying this phenomena of expectations shaping reality. And so he decided that he wanted to look into this. And what he also found was that in the American school system, apparently at this time, I don't know if it's still like this, it's completely alien and very weird to me, but apparently they had these a lot of tests of the children, like intelligence tests, for example, which also to a great degree would influence the way that the teachers thought of the kids in the class. So what Rosenthal did was that he went to a school, and he did the so-called Oak School experiment, and he did this in 1964. And what he did was that he manufactured some results from these intelligence tests. Now, of course, he could also have made some results worse, but obviously that would be ethnically very problematic. Not that you couldn't argue that the opposite isn't. But anyway, what he did was that he made it so that 20% of randomly chosen kids just performed better in these tests, and the teachers were told that these 20% in particular were academic sprinters, and that they could expect great things from them in the coming year, and so on. And what they found after a year later was that, in fact, this had an effect, because these 20% of randomly chosen kids were performing better, or that is to say, they had improved at a higher rate than the other kids. And also the teachers described these kids as being more inquisitive and more interested and generally doing better. So of course this is quite an interesting finding that I think is very important to keep in mind in many contexts. Because, well, first of all, you could say that it means, of course, that it's important to try to focus on positive ideas about people that you meet, people that you're perhaps speaking to, and trying to improve the way that people speak about things may have some effect, because it could improve the expectations of people towards them, and in this context. See? I'm totally losing my thread here. God damn me. Whatever the case, what I really want to say with this is that it means, obviously, that we all have to be very, very careful about making assumptions about people. It means that we have to think very clearly about how we perceive other people and what that actually does to the way we somehow implicitly behave towards them. Because obviously these teachers were not trying to see these kids as differently and or acting differently towards them in a way so that they would actually perform better, yet they did. And now, as I said, for ethical reasons, they did not do this, but it would not be... I don't think it would be far-fetched to think that if they had chosen 20% and said that these kids, they're in trouble, man, they're gonna fall behind, there's a pretty good chance that the teacher, even though they may not have wanted to, in the way they would have communicated with these kids, there's a good chance that they would actually have made them fall behind. And of course this is a problem because a lot of people have, perhaps not explicitly, not to their own willingness, and sometimes they're not even conscious about it, but a lot of people have a lot of negative ideas about other groups. Of course, we have stereotyping of all sorts, which can go unnoticed, I think, because one thing is actually being, say, racist or sexist outwardly. This is easy to kind of keep down. Well, I say this, but obviously it's not so easy. We still, unfortunately, there are still cases of very explicit racism and sexism and so on forward. But the thing is that even for someone who believes very much in the general idea that everyone are equal, even for those people, just because of the way society is and the way they've been brought up, and even the way to some extent that your own brain is wired, you will tend to think differently about these groups that are outgroups to you. And so I think it's very dangerous that we have this thing. It's obviously also connected to self-stigmatization and stereotype threat, which is the idea that someone who belongs to a certain group, if they're being made aware of negative stereotypes of that group, and they identify strongly with the group, then they actually tend to end up being as a negative stereotype. For example, there was the experiment with some girls. Oh, there's a car. Anyway, there was the experiment of boys and girls doing a math test, and one control group, they were just told to, do a math test. And the other control group, they were reminded about these stereotypes of maths, so because the teacher said so, we're doing this to find out what is the difference between girls and boys concerning math. And apparently, I don't think so, but apparently there's a negative stereotype of girls not being as able to do math as boys. Whatever the case, the girls performed significantly worse in this condition where they had been reminded of the fact that there's a negative stereotype related to being a girl. However, this was only the girls who strongly identified with their gender. So yeah. Anyway, there's not much more to say here. I mean, obviously there's plenty to say, but I think it's better if you go out and look these things up for yourself. But I just think it's good to know sometimes that there's actual, even though it can seem, well, this is intuitive, and we often say it in debates, like, well, no shit, Sherlock, that these people are behaving in this way because you're always accusing them of being that way, that there's actual experimental evidence for this. So, that's all I had to say for now. Bye!